Alright, so over the weekend I watched the debate between Gary Stevenson and Daniel Priestley, and we witnessed two opposing views on how to solve the middle class extinction crisis, both with their good and bad parts. Then I've looked at the comments and oh my fucking god, it is scary. Jesus Christ, I mean seriously guys? Nobody believes that the way out of this economic slump is taking things into our own hands and building things rather than just some more taxation? In all seriousness though, it's baffling to me that so many people have watched this debate and consider Gary the winner. After watching it, I have serious doubts about Gary's movement, and I think he showed some fundamental flaws during the debate. I've also seen tons of videos coming out in support for Gary, titled Gary Slams CEO, or Gary Destroys CEO, Demolishes Him, made by your usual suspects, Novara Media and Politics Joe, which we know they're completely unbiased and would never take sides based on their political ideology. So this video is an attempt to balance the scales a little bit, and show the fundamental flaw at the core of Gary's movement. When I first started watching Gary, I thought, damn, I agree with this guy 100%. Everything he says makes sense. Everyone agrees with him, and people in the comments call him a hero. Put this guy in government, make him king of kings, and he'll take the riches from the aristocrats and make it rain over the poor in East London. And then, I had this sinking feeling. I do agree with this guy 100%. Take it from a guy who's been on the internet for a while, I've had to bury all my heroes. On a long enough time axis, the probability to be disappointed by internet personalities is 100%. And there are serious hints of Gary disappointing us all in the future, right in front of you in this podcast. Every Gary video will teach you three things. 1. He made millions by betting on inequality. 2. He grew up poor and didn't even have a desk. And 3. He was a maths genius, and thus he made it as a trader. But not just any trader, he was the best trader. In every one of his interviews, you'll hear this holy trinity of a hero origin. Sob story combined with the underdog narrative. Oh my god, he was a genius that overcame the obstacles put in place by the big bad system that wanted him to fail.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
To me, the fact that he repeats this in all his interviews, in all his videos, is a sign of insecurity.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king.
In all his debates, he's desperate to establish authority with his opponent or host, maybe once, twice, even 3 times per debate, confessing that he is so successful he made millions betting on inequality and using this to establish himself as an authority on economic policy.
Why are we lying to them? Why are we lying to them?
Yeah, I think that's an overly simplified view of things.
It's an overly simplified view of things that has made me a multimillionaire.
Yeah, well, look, entrepreneurs take bets on the economy as well. We take bets differently.
His success as a trader is only marginally relevant to his argument. For example, his arch-nemesis, Rishi Sunak, also made his wealth during the financial crisis era. So if we judge who's right by their success and wealth, who should we believe then? But this is only one of the tactics in his arsenal. When he loses points, Gary will also recourse to emotionally manipulating the audience by bringing up their children. Gary employs this us versus them tactic, where he pits Daniel's kids, which represent the rich people's kids, against the audience's kids.
If this is the tax system that you want, you will end up in a system where the kids of the rich will own everything.
I'm just saying
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And that's fine because that's our kids.
You're not telling the truth about his
Let's support
situation.
it.
He subtly implies that there are two camps, Daniel and the rich, and the common man. I think this is unjust and backhanded. Daniel's objective is affluence for as many people as possible. Basically, he just presents another solution to the problem.
They'll be doing it. They're not idiots. Our viewers are not idiots. They're trying. They want to find the good opportunities, and they work. Listen, they're
I'm not
working
the one
so
saying
hard.
they're idiots. You're the one who says that they can't do it anymore.
Gary needs to employ these tactics because Daniel is significantly better prepared. Any person who understands taxes, economics, and a bit of politics will be significantly confused by the first 45 minutes, 1 hour of this debate. For all that LSE talk, Gary's knowledge on how taxes work and generally which taxes are which is shockingly wobbly. 2 examples demonstrate this. First is the Duke of Westminster's tax case. This shows Gary's lack of preparation. He accuses the Duke of paying zero tax. This is not technically true, and also a mischaracterization of reality. The Duke placed his assets in a trust, which he will then pay the equivalent inheritance tax over 70 years, which rounds up to about 0.6% per year. A much more forceful argument would be to say that spreading this amount over so many years allows the Duke to protect his wealth by investing the money he has in assets, and over time grow his wealth to offset the tax payments. You could also speculate that many assets in that trust fall under these agricultural tax exemptions and are thus exempt from tax. It is true that the Duke is definitely getting some special treatment here, by virtue of him having access to better accountants that use sophisticated legal vehicles to protect these assets, something a common person does not have the privilege to. So they must pay 40% tax on these assets up front. Instead of making this point, Gary starts screeching that he pays 60%, which is obviously income tax, and compares it to the 0.6 periodic tax paid by the Duke's trust. This is obviously comparing apples and oranges, as Daniel points out. This would be an easy win for Gary actually, if he argued that 40% upfront versus 0.6% per year line. Gary, however, chooses not to. He talks over his opponent, who tries to clarify this mistake, and then insists that he's paying 100 times more than the Duke per year. This is not a valid argument because its premise is false. And the premise is false because Gary compares different types of tax types. By the way, the Duke is also subject to income tax and all the other taxes, as Daniel explains.
Wait, why is it not apples with apples? This
Because
guy pays 0.6% a year. I paid 60% a year.
That's inheritance tax.
I paid that 60%
You're
every
talking
year, Daniel.
income
Every
tax.
year I paid
You're
it.
paying income tax.
So why have I
The
paid?
Duke of Westminster
why do
pays
I pay
income
more
tax.
than him?
The Duke of Westminster pays income tax. He probably, well, if he's going to live, he has to withdraw money to have his income. He also, let me give you a list of all the taxes he would pay. He'd pay income tax, corporate tax. He'd pay stamp duty when he buys a building. He pays any of the other taxes, VAT when he spends money. All the same taxes apply to a Duke as they apply to anybody else.
The other example is the fact that Gary fails to explain how he would tax the rich. Because Gary really struggles to distinguish between a wealth tax on the individual and consumption tax or point of sale tax. It's immediately evident for anyone who understands these concepts that Gary either doesn't know the difference or just hasn't really thought this through. Which brings me to my next point. So finally we're here. I want to preface this section by saying that I do agree with Gary. I think there is a massive outflow of assets from the middle class towards the rich, and I think we should do something to address that. But Gary's biggest flaw lies with providing a solution to this problem. He doesn't have an economic model. He doesn't know who he wants to tax. If you watch all his videos, very rarely Gary actually mentions numbers or who he actually wants to tax. You'll notice he's very vague about that, defaulting to vague terms like the super rich or billionaires. It is actually Daniel who brings up the over 10 million in assets figure, which I'm assuming is taken from the Green Party manifesto. By the way, in their manifesto, the Greens actually propose a wealth tax of 1% annually on assets above 10 million and a tax of 2% on assets above 1 billion. But Gary accepts only the 1% on assets over 10 million, which is only one part of the policy. So the whole discussion focuses on only this part, this specific part of Green's policy. I was very surprised to see Gary not contest this. Second, he doesn't know how much the tax even is.
Rich people, 1% of their wealth above 10 million. I did a back of a napkin calculation. You might be able to get 20 billion.
Yeah.
Right? That's if they don't leave. That's if they don't respond to it. If they just happily pay it, you get 20 billion. Okay. That's less than a week worth of current government spending. So the government's out of control. 1.2 trillion a year of government spending is now what they spend.
Okay, so let's cut that, get that 20 billion and cut the taxes for the viewers. Cut their income
so that
taxes.
works out about 250 a year.
Okay, so let's do more. Let's make it 60 billion.
I'm sorry, what are we doing here? So okay, if 20 billion is not enough, make it 60 billion. Why not make it 500 billion then, or 10 trillion? I mean, am I going crazy here? How is this a serious plan if you just propose a number 3 times bigger than your own suggestion at the first sign of opposition? Have you even calculated how much tax revenue the 1% would bring? Again, remember that Gary backed the Green Party manifesto, which proposes a series of tax increases that will bring about 50 billion to 70 billion. So why even accept the 20 billion number Daniel calculated? It is yet another sign that Gary hasn't even worked with the numbers the Greens proposed. Or I'd bet any numbers whatsoever. By the way, how is he gonna tax these billionaires in practice, and what would the economic consequences be? I don't even need to go into too much detail. You can check out the explanation Daniel supplies. It's a lot of evidence and actually the methods he'd employed to protect his income. He further explains how rich people would actually circumvent the measures Gary proposes. He also shows that a tax will discourage entrepreneurship in UK and thus the economy. On a side note, I actually disagree with Daniel here. I believe you could do 1 to 2% wealth tax in this country without hurting the economy or the entrepreneurs too bad. I think there is resilience for this. You could even get 50 to 60 billion out of them, let's say, and for a few years it would be fine-ish. You could use this as an emergency fund and invest in infrastructure or something that would bring a lot of revenue to the government in the long run. However, long term, as Daniel points out, this sends a clear message that business is not welcome in Britain and puts downward pressure on the existing assets. And lastly, one of the more important things that nobody talked about. Assuming all this is successful, how is the money going to be spent? We all know how incompetent governments have been in this country. We can't build anything, our institutions are rotting away, our education is a disaster, our cities are falling apart. I don't really know if the right thing is to give the government even more money, considering how inefficient it's been so far. Remember the 15 billion track and trace app fiasco? It's hard to even say anything on this matter because neither guest has even brought this up. But it is essential when you propose a tax to tell us at least what you want to spend the money on. Because if you increase pensions, for example, that's great for current pensioners, but that will not grow the economy. And if you give the money to the people, how will you prevent this money from returning to the rich like you claim it happened in the COVID handouts era? If you're a Politics Joe or Novara Media fan, or just the average British citizen really, and you're still here, thank you very much for listening. I know what I'm saying here goes against everything you believe in, and it's an exercise of maturity the fact that you listen to what the other side has to say. I'm making this video because we finally have a government that at least has a direction they want to go in, which is growth. Yes, they don't have the best PR, yes, they're semi-competent at best, and yes, they're too spineless to legislate more radically. But at least they look like responsible professionals who are trying to solve a problem. The press and all these left-wing outlets will do what they always do and just chuck shit at them 24/7. If we let them stabilize, I think worst case scenario we have a responsible government, and best case scenario they might actually achieve their infrastructure plans, which is desperately needed to restart this economy. Gary is a disruptor. It's what Farage was to the Conservatives, catchy rhetoric that resonates with the public, but ultimately doesn't have that much behind it. It's so easy to shout, tax the rich, from the sidelines. But how are you going to do that? What are the consequences? What do you expect economically? How will this look in 10 years? And so on. I'm sorry, but until Gary comes up with a proper economic model that answers all these questions, his movement is just another unserious proposition.
You know, I literally went into Oxford and said, listen, the economy is collapsing. I know why. I've been millions of pounds doing it. I was one of the best economists, the best traders in the whole world, one of the biggest banks in the whole world. I don't want it to happen. Can we stop it? And they were completely not interested.
Lastly, this video was about Gary mostly, and less about what I think the solution should be. I'd like to invite your attention to this video I came across recently, which proposes a tax model that would underpin growth. I can talk more about various fallacies Gary makes during the debate, or more about why growth is the solution here. So let me know in the comments what you want to hear next.